Wealth and Wisdom is brought to you by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange.
Hello and welcome to Wealth and Wisdom. I'm James Boardman. Now, our show is all about how do you preserve your wealth and trying to use some of the wisdom that the markets and various participants in the markets have accumulated over the years. So a lot of tonight's episode is going to focus on Warren Buffett. It's also going to focus on one of the biggest issues around the world to all those professionally or just privately trying to preserve their wealth. One of the trickiest things going on at the moment is the massive balance sheet expansion of various central banks around the world. We recently heard from Ben Bernanke that they've decided to do QE3. They've had QE1, quantitative easing. What is quantitative easing? Basically, to simplify quite a bit, it's a euphemism for printing money. So quantitative easing, quantitative number, easing, making the number easier, making the number bigger. So we're expanding the balance sheet of various central banks around the world. They're having huge issues in Europe at the moment. Not sure if Spain's going to have to accept a bailout, how big that bailout's going to be, what the conditions are going to be, whether it'll go directly to their banks or whether the government will have to be in between funneling it to the banks and taking on the liabilities of having borrowed that money. So central banks, very, very interesting. One of the other things is timeless wisdom from Warren Buffett, one of the best investors the stock market the world has ever seen. The returns have been completely phenomenal. One of the things I'm looking at here, Warren Buffett, one of the world's richest men, if you actually put your money in, when he started his fund, when he first sort of did Berkshire Hathaway, if you put in $10,000, that money would now have grown to $50 million. And that's the incredible power of compounding and the incredible growth that he's managed to obtain by using this Berkshire Hathaway investment vehicle. Problem is, Berkshire Hathaway is now a multi-billion-dollar company, so whether it'll be able to get the same sort of results, much trickier question. One of the biggest issues for them now is they have to find investments that are big enough to move the needle. He says, actually, I've got some quotes from him here saying that it's a structural disadvantage to be so big. Now, one of the most fascinating things that we're gradually realizing in this world of massive central bank intervention and quantitative easing and extraordinary sort of measures being taken by all these central banks around the world is that whenever you're investing in anything, there's not one moving part. There's not just the stock price. It's not just about the dividend yield. It's about two moving parts. One is the currency and one is the stock price. Now that is something vitally important that you really need to think about quite strongly at the moment. I mean, one of the things we've seen is that the Rand in the last 52-week period, I mean, recently it briefly went up as high as almost 9 Rand to the dollar. Its low of that sort of past 52 rolling period is actually 7 Rand 40. So that's a huge move. That's a 16% move. That's got a lot of worrying implications for South Africa. One of the worrying implications is it means that our current account deficit, e.g. what we are paying out to foreigners, compared to what we're receiving in for exporting, what we're paying for imports versus what we're receiving in for our exports, is not in a great way. It hasn't been for quite a while, but it means effectively we have to borrow money to keep funding that deficit. As long as we've got trade flows, we have investment coming into the country, people investing in bonds, people investing overseas, guys investing into our stock market, investing in local businesses, that actually we can work with because then we've got that money coming in. The worry is if we don't have that money coming in, we start to have a tricky situation where you have a current account deficit. Not a great thing to have as a country. What this does, the Rand moving from 740 to 860, 16% decline, makes petrol more expensive. Even if the price remains exactly where it is in US dollar terms, we're having to pay 16% more of it. Partially, that's what we've been seeing at the petrol price increases we keep getting at the pump. I mean, I know I'm noticing just more and more frequently we're having these petrol price increases. What is that about? That's about inflation. Now, inflation's an incredibly tricky, complicated phenomenon that we see around the world. One of the nicest, most simple ways to think about it is in terms of shares. If you have a share, let's say we've got a company trading, it's got 100 shares, they issue them out, and there are only those 100 shares in existence. If they issue more shares, that in effect dilutes everyone else's value of that company. Now, to some extent, currencies can be seen as the same way. If you issue more currency, it decreases the value of currencies for everyone in the whole country. Problem is, it's quite tricky to track exactly how much currency is in issue. Those numbers are quite slow, and it's tricky to look at the inflation pass-throughs. One of the big things going on at the moment in South Africa is we've got all these strikes. What's driving these strikes? We've got strikes in platinum mines, we've got strikes in gold mines, we've got the transport workers striking, municipal workers are threatening to go on strike next. It's quite a serious sort of early summer of discontent we're having here in South Africa. Serious issues with it. What is driving these large wage demands from workers? One of the things I would think is actually inflation. And we're having a really nasty confluence of circumstances. I mean, in previous episodes, I've talked about issues with the weather. We've had huge problems in the States with the corn crop. That's what they call maize in the States, they call it corn. So their maize crop, their mealies, they're really struggling because there hasn't been enough rain this year. They're having quite a terrible drought. It's putting a lot of the heartland of America into some quite serious difficulties because they're not managing to grow as much maize as they did in previous years because they're lacking the rain. And the famous saying, when you're trading the grain market, rains make grains. So if there's no rain, there's no grain. So that's driving up prices a lot too. So after the break, we're going to be exploring some of these dynamics in a bit more detail, some of the issues, some of the ways, how do you protect yourself and your family's wealth against the ravages of inflation.
JSE Safex style options, a great choice.